we have a very fun topic ahead of us, and we're going to kind of jump right in. The thing about this conversation that's different is that our guests are what make this different. We've got an IT business owner, we have a vendor, and then we have, I don't know how you describe me, a recovering vendor who is now kind of a vendor slash MSP advocate that works on behalf of MSPs and for MSPs. So we each of us have unique perspectives on this. So what I first want to start off with is a few questions for each of you. That'll kind of be a layup for you to introduce yourselves. My first question is going to be for Dennis. Tell us a little bit about your background, what brought you into this space.
So, man, don't want to go too far back. I was born once. So I was always interested in tech. Didn't really have a career in mind when I, finished schooling and other things. So I dabbled a little bit in this and that, and then got into the technology. Knew it was what I, loved to do, and worked in-house IT for a while, and then got the opportunity because our jobs were shipped overseas. I got the opportunity to go searching for a new job, and I got connected to an MSP. They were out of Augusta, Georgia, had a need for an office, someone to manage their Greenville office, and so I got involved there, and realized how much I loved just being free from the office politics and being able to move to different tech from client to client, and just see the scope of variety. And that's how I got into the MSP side of tech. And then that was 2000-ish, 99, 2000-ish. And just stayed in it from there on. And 2011, I started this firm, EIT Networks, with a hope and a dream, and a cashed out 401k. And
Hey,
had one client, and just went knocking on doors, and just putting some sneaker traffic to everything, and little by little we actually scrounged up a living, and was able to have my own job, and then start hiring others and build a full-fledged MSP. So that's where we are now, transitioning. And last several years, 4 or 5 years, have been making that big jump into cybersecurity. The traditional MSP model is not, obviously not sufficient anymore. So that's a little bit of our story.
that is awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to come back to some of that, because what I just heard is multiple iterations of evolution that have brought you from where you were to where you are, which is very apropos to today's topic, decision making. How do you know what to focus on and prioritize and help you move from here to there? So we're going to come back to that.
Sure.
But I want to give Martin a chance to answer the same question. You represent a software as a service provider focused around privileged account management for MSPs. How does somebody get into that world? I know the answer, but I want you to share with them. They might not know.
Layup shot for me to take. I've told this story so many times. I got a computer engineering degree so many years ago, and I worked in software all over the world. Industrial automation in Europe, the US, some in Malaysia, and then decided that was too much effort, too many hours. I was working 100-hour weeks, which was literally killing me. So I quit that job, and I went to work for a small MSP. There were 6 people when I got there. There were 25 people there when I left. And over that time at the MSP, doing like what he does, Dennis does, I saw a problem. Cybersecurity, a real specific niche problem that was specific to MSPs, and had a concept on how to solve it. So I quit that job. I started Ruffian Software, wrote a product, MVP, got clients in 2019, and then have scaled from there. So now I have clients on 4 continents, and we manage lots and lots of accounts for technicians that access client networks. A very specific privileged account management problem.
Very awesome.
Yeah, so I problem solved it.
So also different iterations and evolutions in your story as well. So you've been confronted with critical decisions you've had to make, as any founder, business leader would. Me, similarly, I've been in sales in the technology space since I was a teenager in one fashion or another. And I've always had a bit of an entrepreneurial bug. It took the apocalypse, COVID-19, to really give me the push or the impetus to actually start doing things on my own. And ever since then, I've had the privilege of brushing shoulders with IT providers, SaaS vendors, cybersecurity experts, and a host of other really awesome and talented people. And my venture is a little more early stage than both of these gentlemen. And so I have yet to learn a lot of the tough lessons that these guys have already been navigating. So I consider it a privilege to be part of this conversation and that you're here today. So let's jump right into that. All right. And I promised people this would be spicy a little bit, and we're going to be spicy without calling anybody out or trying to be overtly clickbaity here. But I think there's some like low hanging fruit that we can start to kick this conversation off. I think there's a big disconnect between the end customer who consumes IT services, managed security services, maybe compliance services as they need, and the providers who deliver those services to them. I think there's a disconnect between them. I think there's another disconnect between those service providers and their suppliers and vendors and the tools that they use in their stack and the people who run and manage those. So I think we got like 3 degrees of separation from customer to service provider to vendor. And I think there's a lot of finger pointing that goes on. The customer points at the service provider and says, I thought you had this in hand. Why don't you? Or why the heck is my bill this way? Or why is my experience X, Y, or Z? And then you have the service provider who's sometimes pointing the fingers back at the customer and saying, well, it's because of this, or it's because of that, or it's because of the other thing. Or they might even point back at their vendor and say, well, it's Microsoft. I said we weren't going to call anyone specific out. I feel like I can say Microsoft. And I'm not going to, yeah, they're big boys. They'll be fine.
You're not hurting their feelings.
I'm not hurting I'm not hurting Bill's feelings.
On a first name basis.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We signed up for the webinar, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. Bill's watching, right? Anyways, so yeah, sometimes the finger pointing goes upstream to the vendor. And then as a recovering vendor, I guess you could say, who's gone to the trade shows with the whole purpose of recruiting MSPs to use our products or services to do X, Y, or Z, I would get frustrated because channel only is a blessing and a curse if you're a sales guy, by the way. It's a blessing because strategic partnerships are an incredible path to revenue. They are an incredible path to revenue. You have a sales force that is 100-fold what just your own limited resources could be by having strategic partners across the globe in the form of managed IT providers. That's the blessing. The curse is that if you are truly channel only, you kind of sometimes want to like reach through the Teams call and the webcam and put your hands around the throat of your vendor and say, why haven't you sold anything recently? What do I have to do to get you to poke them with a stick, do something? And I know that's maybe not been everyone's experience, but having worked for several vendors who are channel only, and I have a lot of close relationships with others, I know they've had that same experience where a lot of their revenue is dependent on the IT provider's ability to adopt their tools and actually go out and sell or use them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, I think, the one of the manifestations of this problem. As an IT business owner, how do you know what to choose? Whether it's to focus on appeasing the customer, adopting the tools, or running the business and all of that. So Dennis, you're kind of like stuck in the middle of that problem. First of all, do you have a different take on that problem? Would you say that, well, I see what you're painting there in that picture, Jonathan. I would add this to it or take that out of it from your perspective. And then for the decision making, just share with us a little bit what your experience has been with some of those evolutions.
All right, so I'll start, and you just help keep me on track. So to start with, the only thing I'd add, just from my perspective, is that as far as a channel only vendor, I love that. I love working with vendors that are channel only for the simple reason that I don't have to compete with them direct with the customer.
Right.
The customer can't go out and just start price shopping, and it just makes things a world easier for me when I know that I've got a solution that is a top tier solution, but it's only available through the channel.
Right.
So I actually love it, but I'm trying to think of some negatives to that from our perspective, and I'm sure there are some, but I'm drawing a blank right now because I can see how it would be a challenge, while there might be some negatives on the other side for the vendor, because it does limit whom they present their product or service to. But anyway, so I have no problem with channel only vendors. As a matter of fact, I very much enjoy them. And the problem, I guess, where we've had angst with vendors in the channel is just the over promising of their software or service, specifically on the lines of, now that we're getting into more of the cybersecurity era and CIS controls and all this. Every vendor is going to tell you they hit these controls, and yeah, that may be true. They may hit, say, control 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, but they don't hit it fully, and they don't. That part's not shared. But you've got MSPs obviously know that we have to do our homework. We have to have a solution in mind and know why we need that solution to begin with. And I know there's folks out there like this, but if we're going to conferences and just buying based on what we see on the floor in the vendor hall, we're going to be, first of all, we're going to tick our staff off coming home from conferences every 2 or 3 times a year with a new tool. But we're going to waste money, and we're not going to be efficient, and we're not going to be proficient at the tools we have because we're constantly adding tools. So anyway, there's we've got stories. I mean, we definitely have some horror stories, some through our years with some vendors. We've not going to name names, but we've got our definitely the ones we love and the ones we love to hate. I think the other big issue for us, I guess for me, and from the perspective of an MSP, is just those who are looking to be acquired. There's nothing worse than getting in a bed with a vendor, and I know it's a two-edged sword. I know that people who develop companies, they produce them so that they do survive and thrive, and eventually that could involve acquisition. But man, it's such a culture killer, especially when you've got a really great vendor and they sell, and some PE firm comes in and buys them up, and it's heartless, and they blow away the culture. You lose all of that, and it's a tough loss. It's not, because we get to be friends with most of our vendors. We get to know them by first names, and we're talking to them and on a regular basis. And I think that goes a long way to giving grace on both sides, a two-way street of grace when something comes up, when something happens, when something doesn't work right, when there's a human error, when there's a technical problem, whatever. If you have a relationship and you're in this community, it's a little bit harder to just torch those people and be really short with them. So I think that's just some of the perspectives I would bring as from the MSP side of things.
Yeah, wow, there's a lot to unpack there. The culture killer, that's a powerful thing to say. And vendors out there listening, I hope that you are taking note, because that sentiment isn't unique to Dennis, I don't believe.
Oh, no.
No.
But I appreciate, Dennis, that you also acknowledge the fact that it is a natural expectation that an entrepreneur builds a thing to grow it and it to become something more than what it initially was. And acquisition is often what that looks like for that person or that company, what they want it to look like, what the goal may have been from the very beginning. So I appreciate that you acknowledge that. That's maybe it's a whole other webinar and maybe in the future we could have some successful vendors join this conversation who have gone through that experience, share their experience being acquired or selling or whatnot, and what they could do to impact that sentiment of acquisition equals culture killer. Hopefully it doesn't have to always be that, but that's a whole other spicy topic to push on. Have you ever blocked a vendor's number?
Yes. Yeah, actually one. Just one. And there was well, I'm not going to go into specifics, but yes, there was one. And I think there's vendors there's so many vendors in the space. Obviously there's vendors out there. Even with our stack being, several, almost 20 layers deep now. We partner with a lot of vendors, and that in of itself is its own episode too.
Right.
Like, how do you manage all of these layers that you've now got in your stack? How do you get proficient at them? How do you make sure that they're rolled out consistently? A whole other story there. But there are a few vendors in the channel, and most people will be able to put together 2 and 2 on this, but that they have tons of equity. They've got plenty of, they can go through cash like it's water. And they're the ones giving out just too much information. That's definitely going to give it away. But they're very, very persistent, and I've told them to their faces at conferences. I've even stopped picking up their swag and all of that other stuff, but they will still get your information off your badge. And I've told Colliers was with me just this last conference at Beyond, and I told one to their face, we don't ever want to do business with you guys. Please don't put me on your list. Please don't follow up with me after the conference. But they still called. I got 4 calls from them when I got back from Beyond.
Sure.
And that's a little annoying. I know, again, all of this has two sides to it. I know it's just somebody trying to make a living,
Right.
trying to beat down the doors and make connections. But at some point there ought to be like a national do not call registry for vendors or something. I don't know. So anyway, we thankfully, honestly, the channel is really good. And on balance, if you aren't involved in the channel, if you aren't going to conferences, if you aren't making yourself, exposing yourself to all the new vendors as they come out, because they are meeting needs. They're solving problems that we all have. If you're not doing that, you're cutting yourself off from a lot. We did, and I speak from experience. For the first several years, we cut ourselves off we didn't go to conferences, we didn't stay involved in the channel, and we basically started to die on the vine and didn't really know it. But when we started going back, it's just amazing how the community really gives back.
That's right.
And it's inspired us to try and do more of stuff like this and give back to the community, because we all rise together with shared knowledge and perspectives.
So like I said, thank you for sharing that. Like I said, this is low-hanging fruit just by nature of who is here, right? So there's more to this. We want to unpack actually some practical discussion around decision making as an IT business leader. So we're getting to that, but just to kind of pull on this thread a little bit farther. So based on what you just heard, Martin, you have the other side of that equation, where when you go to an event and when you've had the privilege to go, ultimately success of that event is measured in new IT providers leveraging your product, right? So I appreciate that you acknowledge, Dennis, that some people have to bust indoors and they're just doing their job and making a living, but clearly there's a disconnect there in some cases as well. How do you feel about Dennis's response there, and what's a vendor to do?
So us as a vendor, we have because I'm a technical founder, not sales oriented, we have taken a opposite approach to the approach you're negative about. We have gone to shows, we get people's information, we email them once or twice, and we try to make a follow-up call. And if they answer and they talk to us, yay. If they don't, we'll move on and try to find the next person. Right or wrong, it's not a hard sales push, because I've had salespeople. I've had a sales guy that called somebody once, and they were so vehemently against being called that they called me directly and complained that somebody even called them once to talk to them. It's it goes the whole gambit of people. Some people are happy to have conversations, some people are not.
Right.
It's really hard as a vendor to know what level of effort to put forward to talk to and communicate to some people, because we have several partners that love us, we love them, and they only became partners because we were persistent. We followed up 4 or 5 times, and every time they'd be like, busy, call back later, busy, call back later, busy, call back later, or yeah, I'm kind of interested, call back later. And as long as you got to keep doing that, because some of them are just not engaged.
I want to springboard off that just for a second.
Please do.
Because just personally, he's a vendor of ours. Ruffian Software provides some part of our tool set. And to your point, we were at a conference, and this was several years ago when we were first starting to really build our stack out, flesh it out, and it really start to try to cover more of the bases with our cybersecurity products. And I had known since the first days being at an MSP exactly what you talked about, that the solution that y'all have is it meets a definite need. And it was one of the things that we tried to solve for a million different ways when I was at a previous MSP, and none of them ever worked well. They were all way too labor intensive and resource intensive and everything else. But to your point, we came by, and, it wasn't you, but there was someone there, and basically he just said, so what are you doing for your techs? What happens when a tech leaves? And I knew exactly where his head was, because I have had that nightmare, because we have, if you see a tech that's been with you for more than a few years and you've got static passwords that you maybe have on a network map or written down, or you try to change them out or whatever, when you're not actually changing those out, they become stored memory, because you're using them over and over and over again. Our techs are. And so when to your point, we walked by that booth that day, and it was just a couple of sentences that just really got me. We didn't buy. It's kind of a hard rule for me now. I don't buy on the floor anymore. If I really need the service or product, it'll stick. It'll stick in my head, and we'll know. And typically now we're getting better about being proactive for what we look for. But so 2 things. Number one, I could testify that y'all aren't overly pushy in that area, and actually was minimalistic. The second thing I would say is just a bit of advice for vendors. some of the best relationships we've had and the ones we were fastest to respond to are the ones that lead with some sort of value proposition. Like before I ever sign anything, you're already pouring into me as an MSP. If it could be something as simple as a white paper, it could be whatever, but you're not waiting for permission from me to start adding value to my life. And if you can solve for that, if you can find small ways to do that, you're going to get in the door a lot faster. You're going to get responses from guys like me. And you know, we wear, I mean, I know at the C level, we wear a lot of hats. You know, some of us are still even doing tech work, right? So that's our ability to respond, first of all, is very, very limited. But what I was talking about a while ago was more addressing vendors that have heard no. They've got the solid answer. We have said no, and they persist in calling. That gets old very, very quickly because our time's already a premium. And when I have to tell you 2 or 3 times, or even if I just have to see your caller ID flash across my phone, it really just turns us against you in such a visceral way. And so I don't know, just add value and you know, let your product do the talking as best it can. If it doesn't do that, then maybe you don't have a great product. I don't know, but his did. His was self-explanatory and it solved a direct need.
There's a nearshore vendor whose caller ID I see come across my phone, and I have told them no multiple times. We have internal development resources we don't need, but I'll see it. Like H Jamalio, and I'm like, I already told you no, and I'm like, I know what you're feeling.
I don't even have to pick up the phone, and my blood pressure goes. I was like, God, I've told you a million times. Stop calling.
So I was in the middle of something else too.
So I have an interesting perspective on this because I've literally ran the teams that called you guys. I've literally ran those teams. And so I empathize with the people who run those teams. I empathize with the vendors who are, like you said, Dennis, they're trying to earn a living and grow their business the way that they believe they know how. I have really strong opinions on this. I do think you should call. So if you're a vendor watching this, I do think you should call. However, Dennis provided some incredible insight for you just now. Always lead with value. Don't wait for the provider's permission to help them in a meaningful way before they're even working with you. There's a lot of different ways that could be manifested and iterated. But that is incredibly good advice. Here's some more advice on that note. The toxic trait that many vendors have is that the problem they solve for is the most important problem that IT provider should be focusing on in this moment. I'm going to share a story. And if you're watching this, Mr. Partner, you know who you are. And this is actually it's a charming story, really, but it helped me learn a lot about a day in the life of an IT provider as a recovering vendor. I helped an MSP with an event in recent past, and the event went really, really well. The last day of the event, we're in the rented SUV taking the booth supplies away from the trade show floor, and this guy gets a call, and he answers the call, and it's connected to Bluetooth. It's on speakerphone, and so I just mind my own business, but I couldn't obviously help but listen. And so it was a customer of this MSP, longtime customer, and we'll just say that the guy's name was John Doe. We'll say the IT provider's name was John, and the customer says, "What the hell did you do, John?" He's like, "Boy, are you on my shit list today?" And come to find out that this individual's personal iPhone, there was an update that ran, and it deleted a whole bunch of their contacts. And like, here's the CEO of this not small MSP, who is taking a direct call to his personal cell phone from a longtime customer. I remember he gets off the call, and then I looked at him. I said, "John, does this happen a lot where your customers call your personal cell directly with personal device issues?" He says, he kind of shrugged. He's like, "It happens." He says, "It's like, are you okay with that?" He's like, "Not really. What am I going to do? He's been a customer for 20 years, and I have a lot of, I have a close relationship with this guy, and not all of my customers get my personal line, but he does." And like, he managed that call, by the way, with an incredible level of empathy and mastery. He de-escalated the guy, helped him feel really good, and something that was clearly outside of the jurisdiction of what his services to this customer were. But he just went above and beyond to help him and provide a powerful experience to somebody he had a close relationship with. And I thought that as a recovering vendor, I was like, that's a typical day in the life of an IT provider, where they're putting out fires, where they're dealing with issues, where they're onboarding this client, offboarding that client, dealing with employee issues. They got to run payroll, and they got to, do all the things. And here, privileged accounts. Would we all agree that privileged account management, if you're an IT provider, is a critical thing to your business? I don't think anyone watching would probably disagree with that. Is it the most important thing? Now, from Martin's perspective, he literally had an experience at an MSP where there was a critical issue with how it was handled. And his experience led him to believe that this is a massive gap in the marketplace for these folks. So he goes off to solve it. So it gets under Martin's skin, rightly so, in a certain kind of way when he discovers an IT provider that is doing it poorly and doesn't seem to acknowledge that they may be doing it poorly, right? And so he would say, and I'm speaking for you, I'll shut up in a second, let you respond to it, but he would say this is perhaps the most important thing that you should focus on. But maybe you wouldn't say that. What would you say, Martin?
Like I have seen many a different MSP do it in many different ways. One of my favorites is there was a larger MSP in New England area who had 900 clients and like 115 techs, and which is totally sidetracked, I know, but they had an Excel spreadsheet where they had all the clients listed and all the admin usernames and all the passwords, which was connected via ODBC to an internal only facing website, so that anybody on their network could go to this website and see all the credentials to log into all their clients. And it was up to the individual technician, one of 95 technicians. When they logged in and it was time to change the password because of the group policy, that technician was supposed to go edit the Excel sheet directly when he made up a new password and typed it in. So I have seen people and they were totally fine with that.
Sure.
They did not buy Tech ID Manager. I'm cool with that. But there's all different times. And like when you ask about whether I think it's important, I think it's very important. But to anyone running the business, there's important stuff and there's not important stuff. And then I love there's a matrix of important and not important, urgent and not urgent. And where you spend time in those different 4 quadrants really says a lot about your personality and how you run the business and how you can prioritize. And the stuff that maybe is important but not urgent is where you spend a lot of time to be productive. But MSPs spend a lot of time in the important and urgent category because things are on fire. Somebody's iPhone contacts are missing.
The urgent. Oh.
Yeah. So like the urgent and the stuff that's on fire is where MSPs live. So I was there for 12 years. I ran the development wing attached to an MSP, saw all the things they were going through, wrote software to help them, and seeing them jump from fire to fire to fire, to come in from just going to replace somebody's mouse to having to fix like an email server that just wasn't sending email for a multi-million-dollar company. Like they're doing all these fire things.
Right.
So to go and manicure their process to be more efficient and secure, that's in that important but not urgent category.
Right.
Which is where a lot of people just don't get to spend time, especially in the MSP space.
Right. And which where a lot of vendor tools and solutions happen to exist is in that urgent but not on, like not what was it?
Important but not urgent.
Important but not urgent.
Yeah.
So this is actually a really good time to segue because we've been going for 30 minutes now and we've shared this specific use case of vendors and solutions that they use and MSPs and the solutions that they choose and whatnot. But this quadrant that Martin's talking about, this was actually inspiration for this particular discussion. As he and I had a call a couple weeks ago, and we kind of got on our own little soapboxes talking to each other about it. We're like, hey, we should break this out a little more, because just choosing which vendors are going to be in your stack, and as a vendor, understanding like the decision-making process for MSPs, that's really important. But for IT providers, Dennis, you're in the front lines dealing with that important and urgent quadrant of decision-making matrix, but you also have to account for these other 3 quadrants. So Can you share kind of like your personal approach to how you know whether, and it doesn't could be anything, like what constitutes getting your attention today?
Well, there's a scale across my history, my time in the industry, where I would answer that totally differently based on where I'm at on that scale.
Sure.
Right. And it's like a knowledge gap, whatever. But so my answer to that today, where we are today, is that you've got to operationalize everything. You got to have systems and processes and procedures, and you should have an SLA. And everybody who calls is going to think their problem is the most important problem. But it's just like an emergency room. You can go in there and kick and scream all you want to at the receptionist, but unless the guy with the severed arm is going to get ahead of you if you've got a broken toe, and somebody's got to make that call, even if it pisses off the broken toe person, right? And if you're staying close to your clients, and there's a lot of ifs here, right? MSPs, we know that this is the goal and don't always get there, but if you're staying close to your clients and they trust you, you've built a rapport, you have their trust, not just a transactional relationship, then they'll listen to you when you, like you said on that MSP that was on that call, when you express empathy, you might not necessarily going to take them back right away. You're not going to jump on your ticket, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, but I understand that it's urgent to you. I understand this has got to be totally frustrating. And you just have to manage that relationship, manage the customer there, and follow your procedures. Because if you start making exceptions to your processes and procedures, everything spins out of control. And then you get into that situation like Martin was talking about with the tyranny of the urgent. Everything is urgent, and you're constantly swatting at fires, and you never spend focused time on developing processes and procedures that will help deal with these days where everything is on fire,
right?
And help you prioritize. One of the things we've got on our screens outside in the office is avoid the tyranny of the urgent. Our help desk guys have to understand triage the ticket, and if it's not the world's not on fire based on the way we understand the world on fire being, then that ticket has to wait in its proper time and priority. So I think the operationalization, systematizing everything is the biggest key. That I think it does take some maturity to understand that. We all believe that going in, but at first when you're small, you don't even have anything to operationalize. You are the operation for some really small industry starting out. So it comes with time and maturity in the space, but I think that's how you avoid the frustrations of those calls, those type of calls and things like that.
Can you give an example of operationalizing a component of your business so that you don't have to be subject to the tyranny of the urgent?
Well, yeah. So I'll even throw in a vendor in there. Okay, I'm not gonna name the vendor, but we found a solution that helped us with resetting end user passwords. That's a very frustrating thing for both the end users and for us when they lose their password, forget their password, whatever. And it's a nagging thing, a nagging kind of ticket for us to deal with, because we know it's simple, we know what to do, but you still have to take the time out to do it. And some of our, some clients just make that really a breeze, and some clients will drag that out into a 2-hour call. But we found a vendor that we now have it's plugged in directly to our PSA, and we can send password reset links, verify the end user, send reset password links and all that stuff right away. And that user can self-manage their password reset. Not everything has that sleek of a solution to it. Sometimes you have to be really creative and come up with your own, but that's one area where we systematize, we operationalize things. Obviously, we're working on this still. We have not arrived in this area, but we are working on a standard build out of processes and procedures for our help desk staff. So when you terminate a Microsoft 365 account, do you have a process for how you do that consistently over time? Like, will you do that this way for this client with this tech? What about when this client calls into this tech? Is it going to happen and look the same way? If you systematize that and you actually have a process and procedure for it that everybody has to follow, then at least you know what the outcome is going to be. Even if your process and procedures aren't great, you can fix those. But until you have a process and procedure to follow, you're not ever going to get consistent results. So
yeah, no, that's really great. Operationalize, systematize. That's a good specific example. And I'm sure those of you who are watching, I'd be curious, as we're kind of sort of coming towards a wrap up here soon, can you share an example of something that you systematized or operationalized that helped you be able to identify what's in that urgent and important quadrant versus the important but not urgent quadrant. What are some examples, things you've done and ways you've approached that? It'd be really helpful for everybody watching, I think. Martin, for you, for some MSPs, privileged account management certainly does fall in urgent and important, and it's usually driven by, I think, a customer that they're talking to right now or a recent experience they must have had. Can you share some examples of where your specific world in the IT space fell into that urgent and important category? Because I think what's pretty common is with privileged accounts, it is important. It is important, but most every IT provider's figured out a way to survive, and they have to deal with it, right, wrong, or indifferent.
Yeah, that's what all clients say too before they've been breached or hacked. Right? Oh, we've been fine. We know how to exploit. I'm sorry, I'm jumping on your question, but I would just say this. I think, and I'm not saying this because he's on the couch right here. I think this is one example of a very urgent and very important. It's got to be addressed. I mean, everything. The attack surface is so big now, and I'm stealing your thunder, but the attack surface is so big now. There's 180 different things that MSPs have to cover. And the thing that's the most important, the most urgent, is the thing that just got exploited.
Yeah.
That's the one that's the most important. So anyway, sorry.
Yeah. What makes privileged accounts urgent? There are two real big things that we've noticed that make it urgent. One, you have a bad firing. An MSP has somebody they've trusted for years, and something goes wrong with that personal relationship, and they leave under bad blood. And I'm aware of and been involved with MSPs where the person that left with bad blood had memorized, just because they'd used it every day for years, the admin password. So they actually went to clients of the MSP and said, look, I can breach your network because it's so insecure. They typed in the username and password, had access, and stole them as a client from the MSP they were starting. It made the situation super urgent. Another place that's super urgent is compliance. Like when your MSP customers come to you and say, we did this audit, it showed this. You are using bad privileged account management. You have one account that 15 people are using. That is not allowed. We failed this security audit because of that. Fix it.
Right.
I don't care how you fix it. Fix it.
Right.
Those are two things that make it on fire, and they move it from that important but not urgent to important and urgent. And like everything eventually transitions from not urgent to urgent.
Right.
If you let it sit too long. One of my, I used to write things on the wall all the time. From when I was a teenager, I had autonomy over what was decorated in my room. I would just write sayings on the wall. To when I was an adult and I owned my house, put whatever I want on the walls. One of the things I always put up there was don't let it default to worst case. And if you just ignore something, like something that's not urgent and not important, it's going to transition into one of those other categories. And as it transitions, it is defaulting to the worst possible case because you're not managing that change.
Right.
So like, and along with the managing of the change, asking as a vendor, asking an MSP to add something to their stack is a change. It's something that has to affect their MSP's daily workflow, has to affect processes and prioritizations and
training.
Training that goes with it. And we as vendors do everything we can to help mitigate and manage that transition for our particular product. But there's also there's a chart called Managing Complex Change. There's a whole book that goes along with it, but it talks about how, as any company, vendor, MSP, personal life change, if you have a complex change, there are 5 things you have to do. And if you don't have all 5 things aligned, the outcome will fail. And it can tell you why. If you don't have the skill set, the action plan, the motivation, the drive, you don't have all of them, something will fail. So to wrap all that back together, they're important and urgent things. Those are some of the things that make privileged accounts urgent. But from a larger perspective, like you were saying, to be successful as a company, you have to processify stuff. And you have to abstract a little bit when you have time in that not important, not urgent category, or the important and not urgent. Abstract it enough to understand all the processes and what needs to happen to make the processes process. And then you can manage any kind of change, and it can be a really good thing going forward.
So I'm having some realizations as I'm hearing you two talk about kind of my own venture and where I squarely fit in the IT business owner's decision-making matrix, because where Channel Falcon seeks to help is business development, growth, new client acquisition in that spot. And where, Dennis, would you say, you asking you to be a little transparent here,
Sure.
where in those
Put me
four
on the spot,
quadrants?
huh? That's why you had this in my office. I figured out. This is just one big sales pitch. I got
No, but like I'm realizing that for a lot of I go back to John, who took that call from a customer in the SUV, right? Like that's his reality. Is he's dealing with the immediate thing right in front of him, and I know, has had to deal with this challenge of growth, finding new customers and whatnot. I'm going to ask him as well, where in those quadrants does new client acquisition fit for you? Growth, can you share a little insight about, like, have you processified that, to Martin's word?
No, not at all. No matter what you call it, we don't have a system or a plan in place. We've been growing by, like so many other MSPs, by word of mouth and by referral and things like that. And it is, this, we've had conversations. It is a target of mine this year to change, to be more intentional about our sales process. And I don't want it to be me. I mean, I'm always going to be involved in the sales process, but I want that to be someone else's baby. And so that we can have a more dependable acquisition pipeline.
Right.
And something to count on. Right now, we up to this point, we just celebrated the wins when we got one, and we went out for a nice dinner, and maybe went on a vacation or something like that, depending on how big the client was. But that's how few and far between they were, though,
right?
Because we weren't intentional. So with growth, though, and it's like anything else. When you've got cash flow coming in, cash flow solves just about all. It doesn't solve stupidity, but it solves a lot of other stuff. And with cash flow, when you actually have some clients built up now you can actually start to, like I said, you can start to spend money and do the things that you need to do to be able to process and systematize things. And an area where we have some low-hanging fruit in our organization is on sales, for sure.
Yeah.
And so I would put it, just to answer your question directly, I would put it in for us right now, what was important,
not
but
important,
not urgent.
Yeah.
Because we're not going bankrupt.
Right.
We're not losing money month over month, but it's still very important that we continue to see continued growth and consistent growth. So that's where it's at for me right now. Something could come along and change that. It could move in those quadrants, but that's how I see.
But what I'm hearing from you is by approaching having a holistic approach to how you deal with decision making as an IT business owner, you've acknowledged which quadrant it's in. But by building processes, you now should have, theoretically, some bandwidth to address some of these.
Right.
And you've already acknowledged it's on the list for this year to work on and towards. I brought it up more as just like a self-reflection, as I'm hearing you, like I'm really close to the Tech ID Manager product and the Ruffian software team. So I drank the Kool-Aid, and I agree. It is, for every MSP, it should be in that urgent and immediate category, that quadrant, but it doesn't always fall there for everybody. Sometimes they put it over in this quadrant where it's maybe important but not urgent. But then I was doing some self-reflection. Business growth, sales, new customers, where does that typically fall for the typical MSP? And I'm sure that's different depending on what phase of evolution you're in as a business leader. But I would venture a guess, to go out on a limb, I'd venture a guess that it often gets in that important. They know they got to grow. It's kind of that 800-pound gorilla in the corner that they really don't know how to look at and address. So there it sits until such time as they maybe lose that customer that was 20% of their revenue, or they, prices increase through vendors or whatnot. And now all of a sudden, man, boy, it'd be nice to have a few extra clients. And then it gets drug over into this other quadrant. I don't know. That was just kind of a self-reflection moment for me on that. We're about out of time. We've been going for about over 45 minutes. Collier, do we have any questions in the chat from anybody? Observations? No, not yet. All right. Well, closing thoughts from each of you, and then I'll kind of wrap it all up. And so we've discussed today kind of a couple of different things. The big one being, as a business owner in the IT space, how do you approach change? We use the customer vendor service provider gaps as kind of a use case to highlight the problem. What thoughts would you share finally to your colleagues and peers in the industry and vendors? Dennis first, then we'll go Martin.
I think I'll take it back to what you started with, and jump off from there. So you mentioned in the beginning, there's this MSP in the middle, and then they've got vendors on one side, and you've got your customers and clients on the other. And there are a lot of parallels between what I as an MSP have to do with my clients. Case in point, going back to the quadrant thing, they may not see the need in the gap in their network. They may not see it with the importance I see it. And so part of my job then becomes education. And I am not going to be able to educate them well. And I'm not going to do anything good for our relationship if I'm pushy, if I'm obnoxious, if I call back a million times. You have to dance. You have to do that whole dance and make sure you're actually advancing your own cause with the client. And then eventually you can help them understand why they need to move this from quadrant to quadrant, because it may need to be reassigned, and maybe it just may be a lack of knowledge. Identically, there may be some things that a vendor knows about their product, sees the value in their product, really truly believes in their product, and they may even have a very good point. And it may just be that they need to put in the time, the consistent time, not being obnoxious, not being pushy, just being available and being around and being consistent with, permission to be consistent. That you may have to train an MSP. You may have to actually change our mindset so that we move the importance of that tool or service or whatever from quadrant to quadrant. So I think there's a lot of, as we thought through this, I see a lot of parallels, honestly, between what we have to do to our clients and what you guys would have to do to us.
Right.
Yeah. But I can tell you this, I sure hope every other MSP sells their services like some of you vendors sell yours, because I'm going to make bank. Because especially if they're in this area, because some of you guys are just annoying. Some of you are doing it super well. You know who you are, but our space is actually full of really, really great vendors.
That's true.
And I love that we're here in Greenville, and we've got a lot of vendors here in the upstate.
That's true.
That are in our stack. And one of those, last thing I'll say, one of those had to follow this path with us. We were with another provider for email security, and they were consistent. The person reached out to me for a period of about a year and a half, not every day, not every week, like once a quarter.
Sure.
And I always gave them permission because they were so polite. I always gave them permission to check back. I never have a problem with a vendor checking back, because things shift and change all the time.
Right.
That's how I think, at least from my single perspective as an MSP, that's how you're gonna, if you're willing to put in the work over time and not feel like you have to make your monthly rent payment with this one cell and you've got to get it. That's my big takeaway for your gift to you guys, is just stay the course. I think you said something a couple months ago, commission breath. Don't have commission breath.
Right.
And just provide value on the front end, and you'll get there.
That's right. Absolutely. Thank you, Dennis. Martin, thoughts?
Go back to the beginning, like your title, the analysis paralysis. Every company, MSPs, vendors, all the organizations, you have to processify in order to be able to see what's going on and know where things fall in those categories, where those quadrants are. If you don't systematize, it's really hard. And there are two major categories of companies. Ad hoc companies, they're usually smaller. They're just kind of going and doing. They make things work. They just make it work. And then there are those companies that are transitioning, and those companies that are actual companies with processes where it's not the individuals. You could take one person out and put somebody else in, not direct cog replacement, because nobody believe people are cogs, but a comparable person, a comparable position with processes and stuff in place. They could make that company still be successful.
Yeah.
And you have to be a good company. The ad hoc companies, you can recognize those when you talk to them, and we don't follow up with them very well. The processified companies, those are the important people. Those are the ones who are going to succeed. And that processifying is like you've said, at different points in your career, you see things differently with different vision gaps. Mm-hmm. That processifying is not something that's obvious or easy from like understanding it, seeing it, or doing it perspective.
Or sexy. It's very, very grueling work.
Right? And sometimes it's boring.
Yeah.
Stare at a white paper and be like, all right, here's my process for XYZ.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is write it down. Write down a plan for
Be intentional.
for
Yeah.
decision making and for processing change in your business. Start by writing it down. And maybe the first thing you do is you write a list of gaps where you've experienced pain throughout your organization, where you're like, man, this is a repeating problem that we're having, that it gets addressed a different way each time, and it's costing time, it's causing frustration, it's delivering poor experience to the customer, and et cetera, et cetera. Identifying those things first, I think.
Mhm.
And then taking each one, and maybe this is just, you put time in your calendar and you figure out who the stakeholders are with those individual components in your business, and you schedule weekly time where you identify, you map it out, and you start assigning, all right, you're going to work on building out this SOP, you're going to work on that SOP, and one of those SOPs is going to be like spiritually, like, this is how we process change in our organization. I don't know if spiritually was the word right there, but it is now.
So there are tons of methodologies for doing it. And the one you described is really similar to the methodology. It was the parent methodology for extreme programming, where you actually write on 3x5 cards. This is the problem, this is the pain I feel. And then you pick out a 3x5 card and you work on it. There are waterfall models. There's tons of different methodologies that are actually meta to doing the process. And if you're serious about doing a process, look up some methodologies on do some research.
Yeah.
Just starting can get you there, but it's really painful. There are plenty of smart people who have lots of very good things to say about how to processify both your life, your company, and how it all fits together.
If you find yourself that you're like reactive in your business and you're constantly putting out fires and responding and not being proactive, probably step one is, I think, start, maybe pick a framework by which you can start developing those processes. I think first, just maybe block off consistent time in your calendar and treat it as sacred, that this is going to be my work on the business time, and don't do anything else with that time but work on this type of thing. And that's going to require some discipline for some of you, because you're so used to putting your fingers in all of those pies, and you might have to actually take your fingers out of a few, or at least prioritize them differently than you maybe have been. But hey, we are out of time. You guys have been total rock stars. If you are watching this now or the recording in the future, we're grateful that you're here. We'll be inviting you all to our next Fireside Falcon. We've got a few guests that we're talking to about bringing them on, and excited to share them with you. So we'll catch you next time. Thank you, Collier, for running this whole thing for us back behind the cameras. Give maybe a round of applause in the chat or like whatever for Collier, because he is a total rock star.